Okay, hi everybody. My name is Stephen Kelly. This is the Stephen D. Kelly Show. This is Truth Cat Radio, www.truthcatradio. It is August. It's 6 o'clock. It's August 19th, 2021. Welcome to the show. Title of the show tonight is Why is Afghanistan so important? I'm going to try to cut through the BS because I know you're hearing a lot of BS and it's really kind of tiresome, especially since I've been talking about this for quite some time. Anyway, so we're going to do a little bit of history of this thing that they call Afghanistan. We're going to talk about the various different conquests, the leaders from Alexander the Great to the British, who invaded the country not once, twice, but 3 times, the Soviet Union, and the United States. We'll talk about their motives, the political, geopolitical reasons, how they changed through time. People call it an unconquerable country. Country is probably something we shouldn't use with this thing. We're going to talk about China. We're going to talk about Rothschilds. We're going to talk about the Great East India Company. No, we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Gwadar. We're going to talk about Biden, his State Department, his cabinet, what that has to do with any of this, especially from the standpoint of geopolitics. So who really is calling the shots here? First of all, I guess we'll start with a little bit of history of this place that they call Afghanistan. Now, back in the days of Alexander, it really wasn't Afghanistan. It was part of the Persian Empire, which he had crushed. And of course, he was on his way to conquer India, which meant that he had to go through this area that you call Afghanistan, and he also had to go into Pakistan, and from there he could work his way into India, or what is called Pakistan today. But to do that, he had to go through the Khyber Pass. Talk about the Khyber Pass and why that's important. But our perspective, of course, is that our military had a real pain getting our supplies in there and waging war at all. Of course, we went in there ostensibly under the pretense of the war on terror because we were supposedly attacked by Arabs that really didn't have anything to do with Afghanistan at the time, except that there was a Taliban group apparently that was running the country in one way or another. Caveman style, of course. But hey, obviously it's about money. So when we talk about foreign policy, there's a couple different perspectives that we need to consider. The first one that you're going to think of is the American perspective because, hey, this, it's an American show. I live in America. We talk about America. We just got through having our idiot president do this big debacle over there. So, we think it's all about us. So, yes, I'm going to talk about it from our perspective, but I'll also talk about it from the perspective of Israel, talk about it from the perspective of the people that created Israel, the Rothschilds, the real people, the money people. Certainly we'll talk about the Chinese perspective, of course, because now that's what it's really all about. And obviously, the future doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what you might be seeing on TV. A lot of times it has to do with these things that are going on in the background or maybe going on right in front of you and you don't know why they're going on. Now, back to Alexander real quick. His philosophy and the reason why he didn't really spend a lot of time in that Afghanistan area, but a big army, and everywhere he went and conquered these places like Persia, Persepolis, he would accumulate more troops and usually plunder what he could, destroy. But there was always some central power, some army that was all localized in one place that he could fight against and defeat and then go crush their capital, steal their gold and their loot. Now, Afghanistan, of course, is a land of warlords. It's mostly mountains. It has valleys, and usually, of course, obviously, you're going to use these valleys to get around. Kabul is in a big, giant valley. The main highway that was built recently is in a circle, goes around the country in a circle, and then it connects in a couple places. One, the Khyber Pass, and another one a little to the east, southeast. It goes down into Pakistan to also talk about that. But anyway, Alexander did not go there to conquer warlords and steal their clay pots. He was not there after their goats. He was looking for civilized empires with plunder to take, not these cavemen, literally. But they were troublesome because he had to invade the property and he had to establish somewhat of a base of control, to keep his supply line going and to keep his men happy. He gave out this real estate to people as he went. But anyway, let's suffice it to say, it was a bad experience. India was not exactly a good experience for him either, but when he headed back, tried to make his way back into Greece after everybody kind of lost their morale, they avoided Afghanistan. They followed the coast. They made their way back to Babylon. Anyway, the British, same thing. Why were they in Afghanistan the times that they were there? Well, let's see. Mostly is because they were being harassed by these Pashtuns, etc. And they were heavily involved in India, and certainly India at the time was also Pakistan. And this border that we see today for Afghanistan was some arbitrary line drawn on a map that the British drew that didn't take into consideration tribes, concentration, population concentrations, demographics, that sort of thing. So one of the biggest issues was they drew a line right between the middle of the Pashtun people, who are down in the southeast section, I guess you'd say. So half of them are in Pakistan and half of them are in Afghanistan. And of course, these are mountain people. They don't care. They're tribesmen. They're warlords. They just walk across that line and go, what line? So they've been doing that since like forever. They don't care about this stupid British line going down the middle of their territory. It's still their territory. Anyway, like I said, that didn't work out because there was nothing to conquer. There are no great cities. There was no control structure. And these people were guerrillas, just like fighting in Vietnam. They would attack, harass, cut off supply lines, cut off these passes. Obviously, the Khyber Pass, they've been doing that since like forever. Well, you don't get anywhere. And here's the other thing, and this is going to be an issue that's going to come up. If you're even somewhat civilized, you're not going to be able to deal with the problem because the only real way to deal with it is just to kill everybody, to raise it to the ground like the Romans did in Carthage, which were Phoenicians, Semitic people. Now, the Soviets, why did they go into Afghanistan? Well, back in the time of the Soviets, all the countries, at least to the north of Afghanistan, bordering it, let's see, what do we got? We're looking at Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, all those stands were bordering it, and this was Soviet territory. So what happened was that little cooked up thing that happened in the Reagan era with the CIA and the NSA, that was like a false flag where they took over the American embassy. Okay, that was us. We set that up. That was a CIA op. Anyway, why did we do that? Pretense to do what we did with Iran. Anyway, we wanted to invade Iran. We always wanted to invade Iran. Okay, well, Iran's got oil. Well, what else has it got? Again, it's got that nice underbelly to the Caspian Sea and all the stands. Now, the Soviets, they knew that Afghanistan is the real prize. And they also knew they needed that real estate as a buffer area to keep us from having a staging ground into the stands, the soft underbelly of the Soviet Empire. Well, here's the thing. The area of Afghanistan, of course, which is mostly mountains, is a treasure trove. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about their mineral wealth. Now, back in those days, gold was the big thing. Well, guess what? There's tons and tons and tons of gold there. Pakistan's got a lot of gold too. You know what else they got? Uranium and just about everything else. We're going to talk about the world supply of rare earth elements. Now, that's a 20th century, 21st century type material. But everything that we take for granted right now depends on these rare earth elements. We're going to talk about that. It's kind of strategic. So Afghanistan economically is extremely strategic. Now, of course, we talk about these interests of these countries, but you got to remember who really runs everything: the Rothschilds. Who set up the coup in Iran and all that? Obviously, those guys, those are Rothschilds that did that. Who runs China? Rothschilds. Who runs the Soviet Union? Who was behind the Bolshevist revolution? Rothschilds. Do they have any influence in India? I don't know. Banking, maybe. Enough of that. Anyway. So ultimately, everything's got to go by a timetable. Now, the United States, of course, our foreign policy is determined by, well, Israel. I guess before I get to that, I should go back and just finish up with the Soviets. But let's just suffice it to say that the Soviets really got tricked into going in there. They really had no reason to go in there. They were just so sure that the United States was going to invade Iran that they had to do that. They had to occupy that area because they did not want the United States in Afghanistan. Didn't want that. And it was easier for them to go in there, so that's what they did, because they took everything over land from the stands into Afghanistan. Well, it didn't work out because, again, they had nothing to hold. The locals didn't like it. They didn't do it right. They were too civilized. They left. They fell out. The United States went in there, cooked up an excuse. And, of course, their strategy was pretty simple. Now, obviously, they wanted the oil in Iran and Iraq, and they, for the most part, got it. But the Israel strategy was, of course, to wipe out Arabs, kill people. Now, the Rothschild strategy is also to wipe out everybody and kill people. Ultimately, that's their big thing, is killing people. It's all about genocide. So the enemy wants genocide, but they also want to control the wealth of the world. They want to make a lot of money. They want to have all those strategic resources. And they want to have the infrastructure to collect it. So the United States foreign policy, working with Israel, of course, decided that they were going to launch an attack on Afghanistan because they thought, well, this is pretty easy to go in there and take out a bunch of cavemen and take over their big city centers, and we'll follow up with all this other warfare in Iraq. And once we secured those two territories, the ultimate goal, of course, was Iran. This is simple war game strategy. You flank everyone thought, well, Iran was the real target. Well, technically, yes, Iran is a big primary target. But why? Why is Iran a big primary target? Because to them, Iran was the most logical overland entrance from the sea to Afghanistan. And if somebody is going to exploit the mineral riches, they're either going to have to truck it over land and consume it in your home country if you're fortunate enough to be bordering or fortunate enough to have a highway that's suitable for transporting this wealth. The United States, of course, we had to put that stuff on ships. So our plan, of course, was always to capture Iran, or at least a large enough corridor to where we could ship goods from Afghanistan. Well, a little while back, I talked about what China had done, and of course, they made a deal with Pakistan, which is the other more obvious way to get in and out of Afghanistan and to get close to a seaport. Trust me, flying in tanks and heavy equipment like bulldozers and the stuff that you need to harvest tons and tons and tons of lithium, you don't fly that in on a plane. You got to carry that on a boat, off it at a port, and drive it, truck it to the destination where you're going to use it. Or you got to build it on site, which is unlikely right now, unless you build infrastructure. All right, so what China did was, first, they conquered an area formerly known as, what was it called? Northern Kurdistan? Northern Turkmenistan? Yeah, that's what I think it was. Northern to something of this name, or Eastern. Well, anyway, what they did was they conquered this big area that is somewhat Muslim, was one of the stands. And they called it, and I never pronounce this right, Xinjiang, that's it, something like that. Anyway, well, this is that area where the Uyghurs live, of course, and where they are doing the genocide, where they're doing the labor camps and forced labor and all that fun stuff that they're doing, slave labor, human organ harvesting, really nasty Nazi type stuff. Obviously, they don't have a whole lot of care about human life. Unfortunately, the reality is they did conquer this area. Now, is this area similar to Afghanistan? Oh, I don't know. What about Mongolia? What about Tibet, Nepal? Well, Nepal, they didn't conquer that, but they certainly did conquer Tibet, right? Well, maybe they didn't put up a lot of fight. They didn't have a lot of fighters. Well, I'll tell you where they're fighting right now. One little area. They're fighting with India right now along the India border, which, of course, is where Tibet, Bhutan, and all those fun places are, Nepal. There's an area called Ladakh, Ladakh, right around the area of Kashmir. You've probably heard about the fighting going on in Kashmir. I believe that's between Pakistanis and Indians. Well, in the Ladakh, it's Chinese and Indians. Well, the Chinese and the Pakistanis are working together. They've got a deal. So what they've done, at least what the Chinese have done, because they're good about this sort of thing, infrastructure, is they built a highway, which I assume is going to also eventually have a railroad and all that fun stuff, that goes through the mountains from Xinjiang through, well, Kashmir, territory that is contested somewhat. The same area, the same war zone where all this stuff is going on, but it's basically controlled by Pakistan. And this hooks up to the highway system for Pakistan, and it passes right by or right next to Islamabad, which is also right next to the Khyber Pass, which is the only main direct road from Kabul out of the country. And it always has been. It was the route of Alexander, the route of the English, anybody, the Americans, the Russians, the Soviets, they had to use this path. Very ancient pass. So that highway system, of course, follows all the way down, further westward and southward, into an area also known as Baluchistan, which is the westernmost part of Pakistan. And on a map, if you look at Afghanistan and you had to draw a line as the crow flies, the shortest distance between the border of Afghanistan and the coast of the Indian Ocean, you're going to go right through Baluchistan right here. And this is exactly where the Chinese built their highway, and it goes all the way to the coast, to this fun little seaport that they spent $6 billion on and created at Gwadar. So now they have a deep water seaport right there. They have a road that connects to Afghanistan in not one but two places, and you can take that same road and drive right into the industrial heartland of inner China. Amazing. Now, the world powers such as the Rothschilds, of course, they looked at the United States and said, sure, we'll let you guys do it. You're a player. It's up for grabs. You think you could do it? You got the military, good. You get this road built, you sustain it, you harvest this stuff. We need this stuff because we have a timetable, we have a schedule, we have things we want to build that are going to require these elements, and we would like you to have this territory conquered by a certain time. Needless to say, we blew it. Our Syria thing didn't happen. We didn't have that secure. We certainly don't have Iraq secure. We can't deal with Iran. We keep trying to cook up shit. Obviously, even today, Israel is bombing targets in Syria. They're still bombing targets in Iraq. It's almost like Israel is panicking. Why are they panicking? Well, Israel as an entity, even though sure it seems to be the stronghold of the Rothschilds, it really isn't. It's just one player. The Rothschild theme, the Rothschild plan, is actually much larger than just Israel, economically speaking. All right, so basically, the Chinese have done what the Americans could not do. Even while the Americans were deadlocked, wasting their time trying to secure this territory, trying to keep it to themselves, even though we had never had a hope of hauling out the ore that we hoped to mine. The future depended on whoever owned it was going to be able to cash in on all those resources if they built the mines. And we'll talk about the resources. But again, you got to get it out of the country. And that means somebody, in this case, either Iran or Pakistan, is going to have to give you the room, the path that you can get it to the water. Like I said, Pakistan was the easiest path, but guess what? They let the Chinese do it first. We would have had to do the same thing. So what do we do? For years and years and years now, the CIA has been going into Baluchistan and has been arming and paying off various different rebel types to raise havoc, to kill Chinese workers, to do everything they can to harass. But it doesn't matter. The biggest highway out of Afghanistan goes directly to Gwadar or Karachi. Now, which one of those ports do you think that Americans are going to operate out of? Obviously, Pakistan is not going to allow the United States to rape the riches of Afghanistan and ship it through Karachi. And obviously, the U.S. is not going to do it through Gwadar. But guess what? It doesn't matter. The U.S. doesn't need to do it because China is going to do it because they're the guys making all the lithium batteries anyway. We're going to have a lot of fun talking about Joe Biden, but that's not really what it's all about. I know a lot of people think that that's the big deal, but let's just talk a little bit about the wealth, mineral resources. Well, obviously, they've got vast reserves of gold, platinum, silver, copper, iron, chromite, lithium, uranium, and aluminum. It has very high-quality emeralds, rubies, sapphires, turquoise, lapis lazuli. It always has. Now, our own government figured that it has at least 60 million metric tons of copper, 2.2 billion tons of iron ore, 1.4 million tons of rare earth elements. Now, this is important because here it's saying 1.4 million tons. That's bullshit. It's actually a whole lot more. And I'll explain why this is important here in a moment. We'll call these things REEs, rare earth elements, such as lanthanum, cerium, neodymium. You know, of course, the aluminum, gold, and silver, zinc, mercury, and lithium was kind of nice, but hell. They say that the lithium deposits are probably at least as large as those in Bolivia, which are supposedly the world's largest known reserves. They're talking about how much it's going to yield in rare earth elements as being in the range of 1.4 million tons, but personally, I don't believe it. Now, when you talk about rare earth elements, and I know I'm skipping all the gold and all the fun stuff, lithium, hell, that's the big deal, that's your cars. But the rare earth elements is really kind of important because whoever controls the supply of this stuff is going to have a strategic advantage over everybody else because all of our warfare and our high tech depends on it. We'll talk about that. But when you talk about it, what you really are talking about is what's actually mined production. And people go, oh, there could be this much. We don't care about what there could be. What we do care about is how many metric tons are actually produced. How much of it is pulled out of the ground, produced. So let's look at the big producers of rare earth elements. Remember, our future depends on this extremely. All right, China, number one, mine production, 140,000 metric tons. Okay. The United States, number two, 38,000 metric tons, significantly less. Burma or Myanmar, 30,000 metric tons. Isn't that interesting? China's kind of occupying that place and investing and getting real cozy and taking over. Number four, 17 is Australia at 17,000 metric tons. That's their mine production. Now, isn't that interesting because China wants to take them over. Madagascar, 8,000 metric tons. I don't know. China's kind of making a move on all of Africa. India at 3,000 metric tons. Now, of course, if you talk to people in India, they'll tell you that India is a alternative to the hegemony of the Chinese and as a source. But come on, 3,000 metric tons compared to 140,000 metric tons. This is the stuff we need for making our tanks, jets, submarines, missiles, computers, cell phones, batteries, you name it, lasers, semiconductors, all this really, really important stuff. Not to mention all the futuristic materials that we have yet to even come up with and put together. It depends on this stuff. So that's a big deal. Well, so when they tell you that Afghanistan, they're looking like, oh, well, we might get a 1.2 metric. Come on, they're playing it out. That's like saying, yeah, that gold mine might have a nugget or two down there. But come on, it's a big deal. All right, I'm not going to waste too much time, but suffice it to say that when China built that seaport on the coast over there in Baluchistan and Gwadar, they kind of won the game. The only other thing we could do is take over territory in Iran. It's the only thing we could have done because we could not go through Pakistan. Chinese already did it. All right, let's talk about the Biden here. Everybody wants to make a big deal out of Biden and how the buck stops here and everything else. But when you get down to it, yeah, sure, Biden's a puppet, and sure enough, everything that he does ultimately is going to be at the pleasure of the Rothschilds and the people that he's working for, the Rothschild-Khazarian mafia. Now, we know who those people are, and you'll notice, if you look at his cabinet, that Rothschild-Khazarian mafia figures are scattered in all of the highest positions with a few token this and that, which is interesting because one of the things that you really notice here, which is obvious, I mean, all you got to do is look no further than Kamala Harris, is that most of these people, with the exception of people like Blinken and Yellen and a few others, they've got no qualifications. They've either, certainly Kamala Harris slept her way to the top, but if I get into it, which I probably will try to do a little bit, you'll notice that there's a pattern. Now, obviously, these guys are liberal. Obviously, they all went to the same schools and they're all Jewish, but that's not the point. Both sides of the aisle did this. So just because I'm talking crap about this idiot Biden doesn't mean that Trump would have done any better. Certainly, ultimately, when you look at what any of these people do, you have to realize that, again, they do this at the pleasure of the people who are really in control. So, as I said, it was important for us to hand it over to the people that could get the job done, in this case, the Chinese. Well, maybe before I get into the cabinet here, I'll talk a little bit more about the Chinese. All right. A lot of people like to think that Afghanistan is unconquerable. Well, what does that even mean? Now, again, if you're destroying major city centers like Alexander did to Persepolis, is that conquering? Do you still control the land? Obviously, Greece today is not part of Iran. Persia is not part of Greece. But the people are what you're really conquering. Now, certainly you could say that the Chinese have conquered vast swaths of territory, and their methods have been anything less than anything, not even close to civilized. They're practicing genocide. They round up all the males, ship them off to concentration camps. They ship in Chinese men to sleep with the women. They outright just move people out of their areas, their ancient villages, and push them into some other area and destroy what was left. And certainly, by the very nature of genocide, they don't care how many they have to kill. Now, if you're going to go in Afghanistan, and if you want to actually control the land without worrying about Mujahideen coming at you, well, how do you do that? You kill everybody. I should have mentioned, Afghanistan, let's see, it's got a population of roughly 38 million. This was in 2019. Obviously, that's changed a little bit. Iraq has something like 39 million. Syria, 17 million. Let me see here. How many people live in Pakistan? 219 million. So needless to say, obviously, you look at these other countries, you go, they got less people. They're not going to be that hard to conquer. They're not going to deal with Pakistan. They would rather deal with these other countries. But anyway, that's not going to happen. Well, the Chinese certainly can move in whatever they want to the country over the land because they built the highways. They built the infrastructure that the United States did not have to drive the hardware into the country and move it in and out, and to move the wealth and resources out. Now, if you've looked at what the Chinese have done in Africa, you can see that they're very good at making deals involving giving them money, building highways, railroads, big projects, dams, seaports, airports. Did the United States do this? They built military airports. I've seen plenty of Afghan soldiers complain and say, gee, you've spent all this money on yourselves and you're giving us the crap that you won't haul home. But did you leave us with any infrastructure? Did you leave us with any hydroelectric projects that we could actually make some money with? No. We spent the money on ourselves. It was always all about ourselves making money. It was never about the Afghan people. But because of our public opinion, we make it out like it is. With that kind of attitude, how are you going to conquer an enemy? There's nothing more than cavemen doing hit and run attacks and blending into caves. The only way you can do that is by killing them, removing their support structure, which is their homes and their food. How did the United States defeat the Comanche, which ruled over almost half the country, or the area that the United States took from Mexico? How did they do that? They killed the buffalo. That was what the Comanches ate. There was no more food. They broke them by committing mass starvation and genocide. That's the only way to do it. And China will come in with a carrot. They will build the infrastructure. They will make friends. They will do what they have to do. But the time will come when it will not be so friendly, and the time will come when they have control and they are able to do systematic repression and genocide against the indigenous people. Now, of course, it's amazing that obviously immediately after the fall of the government in Afghanistan and the Taliban becoming the de facto power there, immediately Chinese says that they recognize the Taliban, which is amazing considering that the Muslim world and the whole world should be outraged at how the Chinese government, the CCP, has treated the Uyghurs, Muslim people, in the area they took over, which is also the area that will connect to Pakistan and Afghanistan. So, my enemy's enemy is my friend. Never mind that they're also committing genocide against your fellow Muslims. All right, back to the idiot Biden. Now, Biden, of course, is an idiot, but he's a product of Clinton. He's a product of Obama. And the people behind him are the same people that were behind these other people. But when it comes to issues such as Afghanistan, you're talking about foreign policy, you're talking about the State Department. Obviously under Obama, Hillary Clinton, which is amazing. Some of the things that are kind of come up. Benghazi comes up. Well, the person that runs the State Department for Mr. Biden is a guy named Antony Blinken. We talked about Mr. Blinken. Well, what can we say about this guy, 71st United States Secretary of State? There's a lot of pretty crappy stuff I could say about this guy. He was also a Deputy National Security Advisor and a Deputy Secretary of State under Barack Obama. Now, why is that important? Well, that means he served directly underneath Hillary, first of all. And being that he's so important today means that we also need to look at his deputy. Now, needless to say, Mr. Blinken here is Jewish. His parents are immigrants. His dad was a former ambassador to Hungary. His maternal grandparents are Hungarian Jews. His uncle served as the American ambassador to Belgium. His paternal grandfather, Maurice Henry Blinken, was an early backer of Israel, who studied its economic viability. And his great-grandfather was the author of Yiddish literature, Meir Blinken. Well, let's just look at his foreign policy. I think really, well, apparently he's got Holocaust survivors in his family, Nazi death march. He also attended Harvard 1980-1984, where he majored in social studies and co-edited Harvard's daily student newspaper, Social Studies. All right, so let's talk about some of the foreign policy that he was involved in, because this is important. Well, first of all, when he was a member of the National Security Council from 1994 to 2001, and 1994 to 2008, he was Senior Director of Strategic Planning, Senior Director of Speech Writing, wrote the speeches for these idiots. It was his words. He was Special Assistant to the President, Senior Director of European and Canadian Affairs. Canadian Affairs, that's going to come up. There's significance there. He supported the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003 and 22. He was appointed Staff Director of the Senate Foreign Relations, a position he served until 2008. He assisted then Senator Joe Biden, Chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, in formulating Biden's support for the U.S. invasion of Iraq, with Blinken characterizing the vote to invade Iraq as a, quote, a vote for tough diplomacy. Now, obviously, after the invasion, he continued to assist Biden in formulating proposals to the Senate. The big thing he was trying to do in Iraq, and this should tell you everything, that his big push was to break Iraq up into 3 independent regions, a Shia, a Sunni, and a Kurdistan. Needless to say, nobody went for it. Iraq didn't go for it, obviously, and it died. But his plan was always to balkanize and destroy the country, promote this polarization. Who does that? He had an undergraduate thesis versed on ally versus ally. What a dick. From 2009 to 2013, he was the Deputy Assistant to the President and National Security Advisor to the Vice President. His position, he helped craft the U.S. policy on Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the nuclear program of Iran. This is also very important because you'll see when we look at his Deputy Secretary, she ran the entire P5+1 agreement. He was the public face. He was very influential in formulating all of Obama administration's response to the annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation. In other words, he was the asshole that wanted to go to war with Russia because those Crimeans dared to vote overwhelmingly to go into the control of Russia, rather having to deal with the Nazis that the United States, under Clinton and under Obama, set up when they deposed the democratically elected country of Ukraine and installed a Nazi. Not just any Nazi, but a Zionist Nazi. He also supported military intervention in Libya. Gosh. And the supply of weapons to Syrian rebels. Well, gosh, let me see. The military intervention in Libya. Remember, this is the deputy to Hillary Clinton, the one responsible for Benghazi, who took all those Libyan weapons, shipped them on Clinton craft, Clinton boats, didn't get looked at because it was Clinton Foundation, tons of it, and shipped it to Turkey where it could be given to the moderate rebels. Or, I'm sorry, ISIS. Well, okay, we could go on and on and on and on. Interestingly enough, he also criticized the persecution of Muslims in Myanmar, saying the Rohingya Muslims should have a path to citizenship. Of course, these are the people the Chinese are involved in helping them Buddhists over there wipe out. He's obviously very corrupt. In the private sector, you're going to see this a lot. People connected to him. I mean, and this is not, they all do it. But he also voiced support for the Saudi Arabian intervention in Yemen. Wow. He's responsible for that too, huh? All right. Now, he set up this thing called the Pine Island Capital Partners. Him and a bunch of other people, big guys in these administrations. Basically, what this was it was a fund probably a hedge fund, but what they were doing is they were looking for investment. They would invest in, well, they called it a special purpose acquisition company, but they were looking to invest in defense, government services, aerospace, and COVID-19 relief. They filed this in September of 2020. Okay. They're trying to cash in on this stuff. It goes on and on. Blinken is there all the time, and every time the United States under this administration does anything, he's there more often than Biden is. It's going to be him. Biden's not going to go anywhere dealing with any power that doesn't involve him. But this guy's going to go on many of these adventures without Biden anywhere near, like to Afghanistan to meet with the president over there, Ashraf Ghani, to discuss the troop withdrawal. It's him. He goes to Israel to talk to people like Netanyahu. Of course, that was back in the day. Without the other guy. You're going to see a lot of this. Kind of tells you who's really running things. Let's talk about his big partner here. What's her name? Let me see if I can find her for you. Oh, there she is. Wendy Sherman. Sure. Okay, needless to say, obviously this woman's Jewish. Come on, you all remember Bob Sherman. There was no hiding it. But Wendy Ruth Sherman, let's see what, she's 72 years old. She's been a United States Deputy Secretary of State since 2001. Part of the Harvard Kennedy School, blah, blah, blah. She served under Hillary Clinton and John Kerry as Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. She was the fourth-ranking U.S. official in the U.S. Department of State. She was the major lead negotiator in the Iran nuclear deal. Anyway, needless to say, the Senate really didn't have any problem approving her for this role. But let's see, she was born in Baltimore, Maryland, to a Jewish family. Her father, Malcolm Sherman, was a Marine, originally from Philadelphia. Let's see, Boston University, sociology, urban studies. She earned a master's degree in social work, and she subsequently began her career as a social worker before going into politics. Her big thing, of course, was trying to help women who had been abused and people in poverty. That's her thing. Let's see, what else did she do that was important? Well, she was involved in Democratic. Well, Emily's List was a big thing that she was part of. She was big in communications. Emily's List, of course, was a political resource for pro-choice Democrat woman candidates. All right, during the Clinton administration, she served under Secretary of State Warren Christopher and Assistant Secretary of State Legislative Affairs, where she directed the legislative efforts of the State Department with the U.S. Congress. She was big on obtaining funding for Russia, but she was also big on the, working with the newly independent states following the breakup of the Soviet Union. She worked as the CEO and president of the Fannie Mae Corporation, or foundation. And this is important. We got to talk about that because there was a huge scandal, and you need to understand what Fannie Mae is. It basically was a huge-ass Ponzi scheme slush fund, supposedly endorsed by the government, used by these insiders to just rape people and make tons of money, and it was like a money-making machine. We'll talk about that in a moment here. She worked under Madeleine Albright. Okay. Needless to say, we know that Madeleine Albright was one of these people that has no qualms whatsoever with wiping out millions of children to accomplish her mission. Now, me personally, I don't have a whole lot of problem with the deal that was struck with the Iranians regarding the nuclear agreement, and I think Trump was a little off base with that. But at the same time, I'll say that monitoring something like that and having accurate numbers is a joke because people use bunkers and they don't let these inspectors go in the bunkers. It's just like Diamona. Here's an example of the type of stupidity you're dealing with when it comes to officials of the U.S. government. But the Diamona nuclear facility has quite a few buildings, but one particular building has an elevator that goes down to where they do all the enrichment and assembly of the weapons. Well, when the United States officials and the nuclear officials came, they just built a wall in front of the elevator doors and covered it with some wallpaper and put a little coping and tile around the bottom of it. Nobody, looked at the blueprints and said, what's behind this wall here? They didn't look at it. They won't look at the Getty. They certainly aren't going to look at what Israel's doing. So you think that they're going to be able to look and see what anyone's doing? No, it's a joke. Nobody can see what we're doing. Let's talk about this Fannie Mae a little bit. What can I tell you about Fannie Mae? Now, if you look at Wikipedia, they're going to tell you, let's just say this is what they call Fannie Mae. The Federal National Mortgage Association, FNMA, commonly known as Fannie Mae, is the United States government-sponsored enterprise, the GSE. It's been so since 1968, and they are a publicly traded company. They were founded during the Great Depression as part of the New Deal, which we know was corrupt, and their purpose was to expand mortgage market by securitizing mortgage loans. In other words, creating money out of nothing in the form of mortgage-backed securities, allowing lenders to reinvest their assets into more lending and, in effect, increase the number of lenders. In other words, money they didn't have. They're letting them invest money they didn't have. And supposedly the government was going to insure this. They called these, well, let's just say this was supposed to be an alternative for people. Usually it would be working for poor people that couldn't get loans and stuff. I mean, it was always difficult, of course, you know, and I guess with everything there's good intention. But here's the thing. Right after this woman we're talking about, Wendy, right after she left, this guy named Franklin Raines took it over. Now this guy Franklin, he made like 90 million in salary and bonuses. Okay, black dude. Anyway, Franklin, he was like all of these guys that were running Fannie Mae. None of them had any experience. They didn't know anything. They were either social workers or somebody that was just trying to make some money. There was a lot of patronage going on. It was a lucrative thing for lawyers, bankers, political operatives to be involved in this and call it a political post, a government post. But it was nothing more than plunder. And it was both sides of the fucking aisle. It wasn't just Democrats. Well, let's look at this guy, Franklin Raines guy. Remember, this is the guy that came right after her. Now, nobody wants to talk about Wendy. When you look at the big fiasco, the scandal that took place, they don't talk about Wendy. But who is this guy? Let's see. Franklin Raines, Chairman, Chief Executive Officer from 98 to 2004. Now, Wendy's tenure was over at 97. He's also served as director of the Office of Management and Budget under Clinton, the OMB. This is an extremely important post. We'll look at who runs that under idiot, and you'll see how qualified they are. But that should tell you something. This is like people that are running the checkbook for the United States, and they're also running a slush fund where they're taking huge amounts of money. It was like the hugest corporation or the hugest thing going on in the country. Who's another guy? Jamie Gorelick, a woman, one of the longest serving deputy attorney generals of the United States. She held during the Clinton administration. Now, she has no background in finance, but she joins Fannie Mae as a vice chair and departed in 2003, and she collected $26 million in total compensation, including bonuses. Let's see, there's some pretty big names, Republicans, Zolik, Buckley, but it's mostly Democrats. Here's another guy, James Johnson. He ran Fannie Mae from 91 to 98. He was a vice chairman. He was a managing director at Lehman Brothers. Oh, and he worked for Vice President Walter F. Mondale. Oh, and this is interesting. He currently leads the American Friends of Bilderberg, as in Bilderbergers. Am I starting to get through here? Anyway, what happened with Fannie Mae? I'm not going to go back to who started. I think obviously this woman here that we're talking about started. Let's see what it says with her about Fannie Mae. Okay, she was the founding president and CEO of the newly created Fannie Mae Foundation, which was developed by Fannie Mae and endowed with $350 million in Fannie stock, with the goal of promoting home ownership and mortgages across wider sectors of American society. Ugh. Anyway, the thing is that Fannie Mae, what they did was they took money They speculated. They made money out of nothing, but they were an investment vehicle, which means that their value was inflated well beyond what was really there as an asset or as capital. There was no equity. So what happened was that key people in the institution, namely these people that I've been talking about, would inflate the records, and they would say there was more money than there was, so they would keep getting more money. It was a Ponzi scam. Anyway, bottom line is by the time this was done, they defrauded the country of a huge amount of money, and the bottom line is they're still here. Okay? These are the people that we've got running this stuff. They're like con men and shysters. Anyway, so when you look at the Biden administration, we know that Biden's going to take a fall. But is anybody going to look at who's really responsible? Is anybody going to look at Mr. Blinken or Mrs. Sherman or the fact that they are Mossad working for Israel? Obviously. They probably have dual citizenship, I would expect. Anyway, not trying to be, what do they call that, anti-Semitic or anything. No, that's not true. Remember we were talking about Semites? You know those guys who said that got wiped out by the Romans over there in Carthage? Those were Semites. Well, needless to say, if Biden's gone, you're going to get Kamala Harris. And conveniently, she will bring in Gavin Newsom, who doesn't need to be voted on or confirmed. I mean, obviously, he's going to get confirmed. He's got the Getty money behind him. And certainly, Gavin Newsom was the person they wanted in there all along. Now, let's go look at a little bit more at Joe Biden's cabinet, just for fun. Now, we talked briefly about Biden, Anthony Blinken. We're not going to talk about him anymore. Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen. Oh, my God. Do we even need to talk about it? Why should he even be in there? Now, this retired General Lloyd Austin, who is the new Secretary of Defense, his whole thing, of course, was Iraq. He's the first African-American to serve as Secretary of Defense, who previously served as the 12th Commander of the United States Command of CENTCOM. He commanded U.S. forces in Iraq. But we should mention that immediately after retiring as CENTCOM commander, he immediately joined the board of Raytheon, an American multinational aerospace and defense conglomerate headquartered in Massachusetts, one of the largest aerospace intelligence service providers and defense manufacturers in the world by revenue and market capitalization. Wow. They say here his Raytheon stocks were worth roughly $500,000. His compensation, including stock, was about $1.5 million. He's also on a bunch of other boards. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. You know, I forgot to tell you guys, one of the things that's interesting about this Wendy here. Let me just make sure. There's a couple people in here that I want to talk about. One of them in particular that caught my eye because it's kind of an important job, and that is the Secretary of Energy. Now, why is the Secretary of Energy important? Well, you'd think, sure, the Secretary of Energy is a job that is typically, involving gasoline and that kind of thing and, electricity. Well, no, it's not that simple. The Secretary of Energy controls all of the nuclear weapons. It controls all of the facilities used for nuclear weapon production. It controls all of the high-tech research that we have in place for creating weapons of mass destruction. It's also responsible for things such as particle colliders, things like the Brookhaven National Laboratory in Long Island, New York, which is also connected to Montauk or Campero, which is our East Coast Star Wars. Now, when the governor of New Mexico was working with Hillary Clinton as her energy secretary, it was him that was responsible for pushing the button, using the device that we had protecting our country supposedly to destroy the plane that JFK Jr. was riding in, so that Hillary would be unopposed and she could become senator. So she owed him. Anyway, well, this woman now has similar power. So it's interesting. We should take a look at her and what makes her qualified to have this job. See what can we learn about this person. Okay, her name is Jennifer Granholm. Now, let's see. She's Canadian-born. She's a Canadian-American politician. I believe she was born in Vancouver, British Columbia. Okay. She moved from Canada to California at age 4. And, like a lot of these interesting people that we deal with, this is interesting because it's going to deal with COVID, went to the University of California, Berkeley, and she graduated a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1984, and she eventually went on to get a Juris Doctorate from Harvard Law School. Okay. She was Attorney General for Michigan, and she succeeded an incumbent there, a guy named Frank Kelly. She defeated Republican John so-and-so, a 94 nominee and 40 former Attorney General. She ran for governor to succeed a judge. She defeated him. Let's see. She became Michigan's first female governor. She was elected to a second term. She was a member of the transition team for Barack Obama. She took a position at the University of California, Berkeley, which is important. Get to that. Well, what I really want to get to is that I probably won't find the text I'm looking for, but here's the thing. But if you ask me, I don't know how you could have somebody like this who's really, I don't see where her qualifications are to be running our nuclear infrastructure. Doesn't make a lot of sense. The other guy I wanted to talk about was, let's see. This is the director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy. So he's the science advisor to the president, and his name is Eric Lander of Massachusetts. But he's the former director of the Broad Institute. The Broad Institute. What's the Broad Institute? The Broad Institute evolved from decades of research collaborations among MIT and Harvard. One cornerstone was the Center for Genome Research. Whitehead Institute at MIT. Genome research, again, hello, yes, COVID. Whitehead became a major center for genomics and the Human Genome Project as early as 1995. They started pilot projects in genomic medicine, forming an unofficial collaborative network among young scientists interested in the genome approaches to cancer and human genetics. Another cornerstone of the Institute of Chemistry and Cell Biology established by the Harvard Medical School to pursue chemical genetics as an academic discipline. Why is this important? Because we know that in 2020 the Nobel was awarded to a woman named Ludna and another French woman for being able to splice into the human genome, the human DNA, and alter it using the CRISPR technology. Now, needless to say, these women were closely connected to Berkeley and also Harvard, of course. So it's not a surprise that all of these people are connected. And what we're seeing now is a genocide because we're talking about people who've always been only interested in genocide. So clearly, if the world is being run by people that are trying to commit genocide, and if the United States is not doing good enough, then they will give it to someone else. Now, who's to say that the rapid withdrawal, the dumping of weapons, and the debacle wasn't planned? Of course it was planned. This is an easy way to get Biden out of office without having to kill him and to work their Gavin Newsom in. They've introduced sophisticated weaponry that was not there before to the hands of a so-called caliphate that intends to wage jihad against the world, which is essentially a medieval caveman style of war that they think they need to conduct against the entire world until we all recognize Allah or Muhammad. You can welcome these people. So the point is that when you look at foreign policy, when you look at these events, these strategic events like this, you can always think that you always have to understand that there's always going to be conflicting motives. That's just the way it is. Now, personally, I don't know what the United States is going to do, but I think this is a big part of the powers that be trying to cripple the United States. And certainly I think that this is going to do a good job of that. If we are dependent for our strategic resources from a supplier other than China, and if we were betting everything on Afghanistan to be that source, well, probably it will be, only we'll be buying it from China again. And certainly this is not a good situation to be in. Now, if you haven't noticed, all the cars are kind of looking the same. I don't think that that is an accident. I think the plan to reduce about all of us and bring our lifestyle down to that of a third world country is to get us all driving little stupid cars that are all looking the same. They will eventually all be electric, and they will all use lithium batteries from China. Now, I don't care what you think about the future and what you think about electric cars. I mean, sure, Teslas are great and all that, but here's the thing. A single 8-pound gallon of gasoline will provide more energy, give you greater distance of travel than that extremely heavy battery that you're having to lug around in your vehicle. Now, when the gallon of gas is gone, you're not carrying the weight. But when the battery is empty, you're still carrying the weight. So it's extremely inefficient, and there's really no way that electric cars will ever, in this current format, be efficient. Now, when Tesla built an electric car, his electric car basically got its power from the air. He created a station that would put out the signal that he could draw the energy from, and his car had an antenna, had an amplifier, and the ability to supply that power to an electric motor. I think it was something like 18 horsepower, and he could drive his vehicle that he had installed the electric motor in around, and everyone thought it was exciting, but nobody realized that the electricity was not coming from a battery. It was coming from a power station that was pumping it into the atmosphere. So, unless we plan on doing that, electric cars will not be efficient. But what they will be is a product and a control method. And it doesn't really matter how much you like your old Ford or whatever it is you're driving, you need to get rid of it. And they will scrap it and give you something else that will have a nice computer in it that they will be able to turn off, monitor where you're at, and control your movement. So that's the future. As far as the Mujahideen or the Taliban is concerned, the modern Taliban, Mujahideen, jihadists, we created them. It's just like this nonsense with Osama bin Laden. He worked for us. That was all CIA. That's all it ever was. We armed them, just like we armed them right now. Now, I know that they create guns and they make their own knockoff guns and all that, but we just gave them night vision, body armor, rocket launchers, aircraft, pretty sophisticated hardware. I'm a little upset about that. And I'm upset that we'll be seeing even more false flags, and we'll be seeing a bunch of legitimate jihadists running around trying to create terrorist activities, which is obviously what they wanted all along. All right, I'm going to leave it at that. I don't think I need to take a break. Thank you very much, but I hope you enjoyed the show. And I don't really know what I can tell you guys right now. This is all very discouraging, but obviously, Occupy the Getty is the only thing that matters. If you haven't joined the Telegram group, what are you waiting for? You got to find Occupy the Getty / Stephen D. Kelly. That's the name of the group. I didn't put up the last video because I didn't feel like it. I didn't feel like having it taken down by YouTube. And my attitude is not exactly that wonderful right now. So I'm doing this show because I think that there's some information here I can help provide that might be useful, but my expectation of being able to get it out there into any large numbers remains as it is. So those of you that tuned in, I do appreciate it. Greetings. Hi, Germany. How are you? Everybody else out there? If you do want to help out, of course, the PayPal, StephenKelly714@gmail.com. Not too many people are using the Patreon anymore. I'm down to like $11, but such as it is. The PayPal address, of course, Stephen Kelly 714@gmail.com. Please say friend or family, because I do have to return it if you don't, because I'm not a business and I can't accept it if it's given to me as a transaction. That's all. If you want the book and you haven't read the book, I think it's important. It really kind of gets tiring when people ask a lot of questions and they haven't read the book. So that's why I wrote it. Please read the book, okay? If you need it, all you got to do is send me an email, law17gun@aol.com. One more time, that's law17gun@aol.com. Law17gun, AOL.com. Also, the healing thing, I've decided that I need to be a little more proactive about trying to get people to do what they need to do to reach out to me for healing, especially from the standpoint of lung issues, because this is something that I think we have some pretty good results with. So don't wait until you are completely screwed up and you've got pneumonia before you come to me. Don't be afraid. Just email me and send me your photograph and your full name and your permission to do this for you, okay? And if it's for a friend or family member, I need the same thing: name, photograph, and permission, okay? I can't do anything without permission, unless it's an animal, of course. I'll work on your animal, but or a baby. You know, babies can't give permission. But and if you know anybody whatsoever that's having any issues, I don't care what you think they're going to think of you for suggesting this, but offer the services to them, because you only get one chance at this, and we're all trying really hard to keep as many people as we can alive from this pandemic. All right? All right. So with that, I think I'm going to let you guys go. Once again, I do appreciate you all tuning in, and I guess I'll do my best to get this one up on YouTube and people can share it. So again, this is Stephen Kelly. This is the Stephen D. Kelly Show. We are TruthCat Radio, www.truthcatradio.com. It's still August 19th. It's now 7:20 p.m. I'll see you guys next week, God willing. Good night. God bless. Adios. And goodbye.